And welcome back to PSA TV. This is Eye on Labour. Before we get into today's programming, of course, let me quickly apologize to all our viewers. We did in fact receive a break in transmission earlier on, but I can assure you now that we're back up and running. So welcome back, and apologies once again for that earlier break in transmission. Joining me on set this morning right now, I've got a political activist, Mr. Ravi Maharaj. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. And good morning to you viewers.
How are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I think I'm happy that I can be here this morning.
Right.
You know, granted the circumstances.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot to talk about there. But before we get into that, let me just quickly say that, let me remind you, of course, in fact, that the PSA president, Mr. Watson Duke, will be holding a press conference later this morning, about 10 o'clock, breaking the silence. So you, of course, want to stay tuned for that. And just quickly from an article here done in the Newsday, where we're seeing that he has vowed to continue his struggle for justice, peace, and bread until there is a change in the government. Ravi, what is your take on the entire situation?
Well, I, just like many people in the country, feel that this is an attack on the democratic process of Trinidad and Tobago and the freedom of speech that is entitled to all citizens under the Constitution. I mean, the statements that were made by Mr. Duke last year came out of frustration with regards to the failure of the government to provide basic needs to both government workers and the country on a whole. You know, so for them now to attack him and to file these malicious charges against him just shows that, you know, they are vindictive and that they will use anything at their disposal to stifle and muzzle anyone who speaks out against them.
Yeah. We would have also seen here that Matt has called for the repeal of the Seditious Act.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen calls, the Media Association, Rosemary Bell Antoine, who is the Dean of Law at UWI, you know, and other persons who understand the law are saying, you know, that they didn't expect that someone in 2019, almost 100 years after the law was first enacted, would still be tried and prosecuted under this law, especially since our Constitution, which was passed in 1962, gives the right of speech to the citizens.
You know, when you look at the law entirely, it is pretty outdated.
It is.
It's 117 years old.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is that at that time, I mean, you would have had, you know, World War I would have just gone on, you know, so you would have had these things being passed in that type of atmosphere where governments were trying to stifle any sort of further interaction.
The freedom of the workers and
but today, you know, in a democratic society and in a modern society, I mean, this law really should not exist.
Are we really democratic, considering all that has been happening over the last week? Are we really democratic?
We're still a very young society. I mean, even though we got our independence in '62. We only left the UK in 1976. So, you know, we're still trying to find our footing, and we're still trying to figure out how things work in Trinidad as an independent society. And all of these are part of the growing pains that come to that. But at the same time, you know, we need the government to understand that we need an avenue to speak out and to let our voices be heard, and we cannot be stifled in any way when we're doing that.
Have you looked at the Seditious Act itself?
Yeah, I have. And again, at the time that it was written, it makes sense because of what was going on in Europe and the rest of the world. But, I mean, the only modern day counterpart to this I could think of would be the Patriot Act, which was enacted after the World Trade Center incident, you know, and the U.S. tried to stifle any sort of insurrection in their country. You know, and this is, the PNM now is using the Sedition Act. They didn't have to pass anything because they found this. And they're using this in the same way the US used the Patriot Act to take away the rights of the people and to arrest anyone that they found may have been a threat to the government.
Can we safely say that this has kick-started 2020 election campaigning?
Well, I mean,
this is just seal the deal, because
yeah.
I mean, with political campaigns, you have to expect.
No, I know, and I understand why the PSA is taking up this now, because Mr. Duke was involved in it. But you have to remember, not too long ago, I think it was December last year, that Mr. Maharaj,
yes.
you know, his offices were raided, you know, and there was a suspicion that he may have been charged under the Sedition Act as well, but I don't think they got enough evidence.
No. But I know he's also been calling for the repeal of this act, and later on in December, they will be challenging the constitutionality of the act itself.
Well, I mean, yesterday the Prime Minister made an unfortunate statement where he said, you know, if we're looking at old laws that should be repealed just because of how long ago they were thing, then we should repeal the laws for trespassing, for murder, for assault, and all these things.
It's not the same.
Exactly. You know, so I mean, I don't know what can come out of it really, because the government has shown that they are willing to take this stance and this approach in dealing with their opposition. So I don't know that they would look to change anything now.
I'm seeing something here very interesting from the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, which I was fortunate enough to be a part of a few years ago. And it says here that the association reflected on the journey from Crown Colony to independent existence. The recent remobilization of selected provisions of the 99-year-old Sedition Act incompatible with citizens' constitutional right to freedom of expression. It goes on to say the 1920 law imposes restrictions on citizens' exercise of free speech that are so low and sweeping in an independent 21st century democracy as to render all citizens vulnerable to criminal charges. Worryingly, the Sedition Act introduced by colonial authorities
Yep.
to suppress independent critical views permits the suspension of newspapers containing seditious matters, and it applies further to all written and printed material. You know, this is something that, like we were just talking about, it's a very colonial act. The law itself has been 1920s. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. And again, I keep going back to the context that it was written, because remember at that time, what was going on in Europe was very polarizing. You had the Axis powers kind of rising, and there was a lot of support for it. So the UK had to create something that would suppress anything that went against the government of the day, right? But again, 100 years later, we live in a society now where freedom of thought, freedom of expression is encouraged. And so anything that is being used to suppress that should not be part of our society.
But here it is that it is, you're basically saying in a democratic state where you have all these freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but you have conveniently the use of outdated, and to quote, I think it would have been the MSJ leader who said, you know, it's a dinosaur-like act.
It is.
And it's very draconian. Yeah. So you have, is it a matter of convenience now that you naturally pull this law and apply it to whoever you want to apply it to, you know?
Well, that's a good thing that you brought up as well, because since Watson Duke was arrested and charged for the matter, you know, people have been revealing other things that have been said by persons within the government, you know, that have been overlooked and that may have fallen under the Sedition Act as well. You know, but they are singling out only persons who are opposed, who are speaking out against the government, and they're not looking at their own.
Yeah, I think what is good for this person must be good for the other
It should
person.
be. I mean, the laws apply to everyone.
It's fair. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be equal, but you know, it's really not the case here. You know, as in your view, I know yesterday you would have posted a video about democracy.
Right.
So I didn't get a chance to look at the entire thing, but what I think stood out to me is, you know, the fact that you maintain that democracy is something that is supposed to be what Trinidad and Tobago embodies.
It should.
And I mean, is it really that we're embodying it right now?
Well, I mean, the people want to see democracy, you know, shine in Trinidad and Tobago. They want to have a very open society where you can go about once you're following the laws and you can do and say whatever you please. What the government is doing, however, is that they are trying to control what is being said and what, especially when it regards to their own decisions or their persons affiliated with them. So the country needs to recognize what the government is doing and recognize that even though it is the law they're using, the Sedition Act that they're using to kind of enforce this, the government would have found any other avenue to kind of impose this type of regime. And if it's the government that's doing, then what I said in the video is that the thing that needs to be changed isn't the act, but it's the government.
Yeah.
So that's what people need to be looking at. Very
interesting there. I'm seeing here that the opposition member, Rudy Indar Singh, is a very interesting question he's posing here.
Right.
Said he's questioning if Mr. Duke's arrest was aimed at sending a message that law enforcement agencies will be used to intimidate and stop any type of protest by the trade union movement.
It is. And I'll tell you, I mean, prior to this, we heard that the police will be, they brought this new buses to
and you know, a lot of people have been very silent on that. I don't think they understand really what it means. That just saying like a little bit briefly, these buses were brought down to the country. So when there's any kind of protest or anything, the police can just swoop down and take you up and transport you. Basically, they could just do whatever they want.
And the thing is, I mean, prior to this, you know, again, we saw with Maharaj, with other persons. So the message is being sent, a clear and direct message is being sent to the populace that as long as you speak out against the government, they are going to take action against you, whether it be legal, whether it be police action. And then you have to also question then the independence of the police service and the independence of the Director of Public Prosecution. Because if they are being used as well to kind of facilitate these things that are taking place, then are they truly independent?
So I mean, as citizens now, should we be living in fear? You know, like the media is supposed to be the independent body that is a one thing between truth, the lies, and we're supposed to be that body. So you have the Media Association even under attack there. You have government officials. You have basically anybody. As long as you voice your opinion in a type of way.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago as well, the PNM government was looking to enact new legislation for online social media.
Yes, that was the cybercrime.
The Cybercrime Act, and you know, all of these things would have fallen under that as well, and they would have been looking to suppress speech online as well as in media.
Then this is not democratic. This is very much dictatorship.
It's not. And again, I mean, as much as we're looking at the laws that they're using, you have to look at the government as well.
Because it's the government who chooses to implement or not implement something, and you make amendments to this to your own benefit, at the expense of the population, at the expense of an individual, as the case may be. In the PSA's president case here, it's a direct attack on not just him, but the entire
public service.
the entire public service. And I just find that it was ironic that this arrest was done a few days after he responded to comments made by the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and the comments, even going back to last year, the comments that he's being charged for were being done in defense of the employees at WASA who were being victimized. And now here again, you know, he's speaking out when the Prime Minister made this ridiculous comment, you know, about people in the public service.
Yeah, they don't
do anything and you know, that they're lazy. He didn't use the word lazy, but he
it
basically
alluded
said
to that.
Yeah. So when you have one person trying to defend the public service and to defend the rights of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and then he is immediately being prosecuted for that, then you have to wonder what can be done, if anything can be done, if we're heading towards a dictatorship in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, I clearly don't see it as a democracy anymore. You can't have laws and you can't have freedom of speech and all this. Trinidad and Tobago, you're free to do whatever you want to do, but then on one hand you have that, and then on the other hand you have these convenient coming down of laws, and you suddenly choose to just go back to the law books. I mean, there are so many other things that need to be dealt with urgency, yet you choose to do something like that. Do you see this only as an attack on the public service or his political career as well?
Well, I mean, you know, Mr. Duke challenged the Prime Minister and the government, and you know, he's both the head of the public service and he is a member of the THA in Tobago.
Leader.
And he poses a threat to the PNM in the upcoming general election as well, if his party has momentum to take away any seats from them there as well. So, I mean, the Prime Minister would be looking at all these things. He's going into 2 elections. And again, it's about sending a message to people that if you're willing to speak out against the government, then you have to deal with the consequences.
I think that, you know, if we were to be fair, then a lot of people has to be charged under this act.
Well, I mean, I think no one should be charged under the act.
If we're going with it based on their theory.
But yeah, if they want to charge one, then they should charge all.
Yeah, I think
and there are a number of persons within the government who need to be charged as well.
Of course, I mean, we've seen some comments on Facebook that has been making the rounds.
Yeah, I mean, Fitzgerald Hines, you go back to Hilton Sandy, you go to this other guy, Emberts. So there are a number of persons, even Dr. Ravi in the past, you know, when he was in his Bulldog days.
Yes.
You know, I mean, he would have made some comments that would have surely had interest under this act. So, again, and I don't think anyone should be charged under the act, but if you're going to charge one, you need to charge all.
Yeah, I mean, if it is, that's what we're doing. We're doing this thing based on what they see is seditious from what is not seditious. Then, all right, start from your side.
Yeah.
You know, what is good for one person must be good for all. It now brings me to, are you concerned about the level of power that the government, or the abuse of power, I should say, that the government has been exercising of late?
Well, absolutely. And again, it goes back to them using, I mean, one of the first things they did when they came into power was to restructure and reorganize the SSA.
Yes.
And then they appointed a police commissioner. As good or bad a job you may think Gary Griffith is doing, he was the least qualified person to do it in regards to the report presented by the Police Service Commission.
Okay.
And now when we see that, you know, they're using him as a tool for their own political agenda, you understand why they appointed him. So the thing about it, they're taking away the independence of these institutions and they're using them in a way that can only lead to a dictatorship basically in Trinidad and Tobago. Because Keith Rowley wants to have ultimate control of everything going on, and you must be able to speak out, and that only exists in a dictatorship.
As a as a young person and as a very vocal person as well, as an activist, are you concerned about, probably some things that you yourself would probably be wanting to talk about, make a video about it, but you know this is to the back of your mind. Can they now come down on me for saying something that they deem as seditious?
Absolutely. And anybody, not just myself, but anybody who has been speaking out now has to rethink whether or not they want to say something or whether or not they want to do something. I mean, I'm sure there'll be less people in front of Parliament whenever it resumes now, because they'll be conscious and they'll be scared to show their faces because they don't know what will happen.
And to my knowledge, that is not democracy.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And wherever a government rules by fear, then, there can be democracy in a country.
Yeah. Going forward, though, how do you think that the trade union movement should, pull together itself and go forward?
Well, outside of the government, I think the joint trade union movement is the second most powerful group of people in the country.
I say that all the time.
And if they can combine their forces, then they can create something, a movement or a protest or something, or lobby to have change to make the government rethink their strategy. But unless they can do it, a full force movement, I don't know how successful they can be.
I think what I've seen over time is the coming together of these trade unions, whether it's for a march, whether it's for just a regular press conference. I think something of, the anonymity has been something that, it has been to the side. And going forward, I have seen where the camaraderie is something, it's been common, and, for the interest of not just Mr. Duke, but for the public servants themselves, I've seen that, differences were put aside, and we've seen that coming together. So hopefully in the future we can look forward to some more of that.
Yeah, but then again too, you have to remember that the PNM, since it came into power, have been systematically destroying
trying
the
to
trade
destroy.
union.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I mean,
Yes. And that's why I asked you this morning if you think, because time and time again we've seen the government itself attack the trade union movement. So now if you think well, okay, we've been attacking them, but they're not falling at all.
Right.
So now, okay, well, fine. Let me just attack him a different way. We'll attack his political career. So it's either from the trade union movement or from the politics, from his political side.
Yeah. And again, this is what? He made the comments in November last year, so this is some 10 months later, right? 10 months later, you go to arrest someone for sedition. I mean, if he had any malicious intent with regards to his statement, you'd have think that, he would have done something in that time. But it's just that they want to send a message to the trade unions, to the opposition, and to anybody in Trinidad and Tobago who makes the mistake to speak out and to say something negative about the government. They want you to know that they intend to keep you in line.
They'll just rain terror.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier on when it comes down to going forward and finding strength and coming together. We also saw where the opposition leader has extended her hand to the trade union movement.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know she keeps extending her hand. I don't know if Mr. Duke will accept it.
Right.
But going forward, there needs to be some sort of accommodation. There needs to be some sort of arrangement where all these forces could combine to fight against the tyranny of the government. Unless they can do that, then you'll always have this split, this fracture, and then the government will remain strong.
And then we'll see more arrests under the Seditious Act.
Yeah, and part of the reason why the government thinks that they can get away with it too is that, you know, you have all these fractions in Trinidad that are fighting and are opposing them. But because of the fractures,
Yeah.
you know, none of them are strong enough to create anything or do anything.
But I think he particularly sees the strength here, so that's where the attack must be launched there directly. You know, as someone like yourself who has always been very vocal about this, going forward as well, what do you hope to see coming? Or do you think that probably we'll see a change in the way in which people speak in public, or, you know, like political speeches would not be so passionate anymore? Because I mean, when you look at some of these speeches on platforms, a lot of them are driven by passion.
Yeah, I mean, well, politics is a very passionate subject. And, you know, especially when you're dealing, when you see people suffering under a government, I mean, you know, it raises the passion within everyone, and that's what drives them to go out and speak out about it. When the government realizes, you know, that people are starting to speak out more and more and more, I think there'll be change. But again, they are trying their best to suppress it, and that's what they're trying to do with this, you know.
But I don't think the nation will allow that, though.
I hope not. I can only hope not.
I mean, we've seen a lot of people been voicing their opinions on the act itself. A lot of people been, you know, I know Mr. David Maharaj is also challenging the law itself, well, the act itself.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone will look to see the outcome of the trial against Mr. Duke, and hopefully that can result in a victory for him, and then we can see a change.
I don't see it going any other way, but, you know, you know.
I know, but I mean, I didn't see the DPP charging him for something like this either.
I did not. I really did not. $250,000.
Yeah. So, I guess all we can do is wait and see.
Yeah.
And keep up the fight in the interim.
And how do you plan to, you know, go about fighting the seditious act? Like,
well, I will continue speaking out. I mean, I have my
cautiously
mail list.
Or freely?
No, I will. Well, I mean, I've always measured what I've said, and I've always tried to stick to the facts, and hopefully, you know, I don't get in trouble for it. But because of the way I write, because of the way I speak, it's very hard for the government to come after me.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would have.
I know.
You know.
I know. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Duke would have thought so as well, but I don't know.
Yep. Let me see here. I want to read just an article here from the Newsday, where Mr. Embarrassing as well, he's saying that, you know, it was a coincidence that the instruction to charge Mr. Duke came mere days after he criticized the Prime Minister's statements of the work ethic on public servants. What was your thoughts on the statements made by the Prime Minister on the whole?
No, well, again, I mean, the statements, the two statements he's made is one, that he stands by the Sedition Act, and then two, that, you know, after the backlash that he got from different organizations and persons in the public, you know, he said, if we need to look at repealing all of these old acts, then, you know, trespassing, murder, and he went back to Magna Carta and assault and these things. And that's not the words, and that's not the approach a government should be using in a matter like this.
Nope. And from the media associations, and we see here that Matt has pointed out seditious intent is broadly defined as an intention to bring into hatred or contempt, or to excite disaffection against government or the Constitution, to raise discontent or disaffection amongst inhabitants of TNT, and to engender feelings of ill will, words, hostility, or to contempt for any class of inhabitants or TNT distinguished by race, color, religion, profession, calling, or employment. And the article goes on to say that Matt sees this act as a potentially criminalizing journalists media houses, public interests, activists, trade unions, artists, bloggers, and assorted social media commentators.
Well,
And you fall into a lot of categories there.
I do. And I'll tell you something that is curious about the act itself is that it doesn't only look to protect the Constitution and the President, but it also tries to protect the government. And I think that is something that really needs to be looked at and overturned, because whenever you have an act saying that you cannot speak out against the government,
Yeah.
right, that is dangerous, because then you're saying that how the government is there and their word is law, and you can't, not in a democracy, you can't have something like that.
You know, it's funny that the country itself, England, England has repealed this act.
Yeah, I mean, most countries in the world have repealed this act, and something that we should also wonder and something we should also question is why this act wasn't repealed when we became independent. You know, and we created our constitution, and the constitution itself conflicts with the act. So this act should have been repealed back in 1962.
Well, it's not too late.
Well,
57 years down and we're still...
It's late for Mr. Duke.
Well, yes,
Unfortunately.
that much, unfortunately. You know, as a young person, do you think that many young people understand what has been happening here?
I think so. You know, it's been widely covered in the news and on social media. A lot of people have been speaking about it, so I think it's known and people understand. I don't think that they fully understand the consequences of it, though. And that is something that we need to reinforce. Because if you allow the government to get away with it, and even if it's just one person, you know, then they will do it more and more and more in the coming months leading up to the election. So that's why it's important that people speak out on it now, and we try to knock it down as quickly and as effectively as possible.
And I'm seeing here that we have, it's a petition called Abolish the Sedition Law. 759 signatures thus far.
Right.
And it says, you know, today we find ourselves debating the law of sedition. Sedition is defined as conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of a state or monarch. And as you can see, the law is meant to make it a criminal offense to speak out against the state or the government. It's a vague and ambiguous law that can be used by any oppressive government to suppress freedom of speech. This law was enacted by the courts of England since 1275, and it was specifically enacted to make it a criminal offense to speak out against the monarchy. The monarchy enacted this law to try to stifle democracy. 773 signatures. Wow.
Yeah.
We're heading to 1,000 slowly and surely. I shouldn't say slowly, but really, really fast, actually.
Yeah.
So that's something you'll obviously see on our Facebook page a little later today. You know, feel free to share and sign.
Right.
Yeah. How do you think our response has been so far in terms of the public's views on the entire bill? Or the entire act, sorry.
I mean, again, most of the responses I've heard have been criticizing and condemning the act, both the Sedition Act and the act of charging Mr. Duke with this nonsense. But again, if the government isn't willing to listen, and if the government is just going to go ahead, you know, and do whatever they want, then it's a very frightening time in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, it is. And don't forget, we have that press conference for you coming up later at 10 a.m. It's just about 9:41 here. I'm going to ask you your closing comments before we wrap things up for today.
Okay, sure. Well, I fully support Mr. Duke as he goes forward in the court. I hope that the courts can see the fallacy in this entire thing, and that, you know, he can go free. But again, we need to send a clear and decisive message to the government that we cannot stand for these types of things taking place. Not in 2019, not in a democratic society. People need to have the ability to speak out. People need to voice their concerns, to voice their opposition with the government if necessary. And any attempt to stifle, to muffle the voice of the people is anti-democratic.
The president of the Public Services Association, Mr. Watson Duke, as he breaks his silence on this entire situation that, you know, it's something very unfortunate, very troubling, not just for the trade union movement, but on the side of democracy in our country. We all await to hear what he has to say in terms of his health, how he has been doing. I know he has been in hospital, in and out. So at 10 o'clock, we'll know what has been happening with Mr. Duke himself, in body and in flesh. Well, we shall be updated by him at 10 a.m. So on behalf of all of us here at PSA TV, here's wishing you a safe and blessed day.
How is it?
Gracias. Brilliant as always.
Thanks.
So we just have to